Hello everyone and welcome to Code with Goldencat. Today we'll be creating a 3-tier one-to-one chat application using Spring Boot, Thymeleaf and MySQL. Let's begin. By the end of this video, you should have a working application that looks something like this. The login page and a registration page. So if I register a new user here, say Mr. Hoss with password 1234 and then log in with that account. Right now it's showing no online users. So if I log in with an existing user, say Goldencat 1234, you can see that I got the notification in real time that a new online user has just popped on. Now I can open another tab here, localhost 8080, and then log in with another account, say Mighty Mouse, password 1234, and you can see how it goes. You can have n number of users, and when they come online, they are shown in the online users list. Now I can also send out a message to Mr. Halls from here. Hey, and in real time, we get a notification that Mighty Mouse just sent us a message. If I open that, I get the message, hey, and I can send him another message. And he receives it in real time as well. Now, if I log off from any of the accounts, say Mighty Mouse, now that gets removed from here. Also, if you haven't watched my previous video on WebSockets, then I would highly encourage you to watch it before watching this one, because this is an advanced version of what we have built in the chat room application. You can go to my YouTube channel just by clicking on this YouTube icon, and it takes you to my YouTube channel. Now that we have seen what we are building, let's get right into coding. Now before we get started, we first have to download or clone the skeleton project. So if you go to this chat app repository, the link to this is mentioned in the video's description down below. Then click on code and copy this link. Then go to your required directory and open command prompt and type in git clone and then the repository link. This would clone the repository and it's present here now. Now I can open this in IntelliJ. Now by default, you should be at end branch. If I go to git and open it, you can see the local only has end branch. So the end branch contains all the files that are required for this project that we'll be building in this video. So if I open Java, you can see all of these files are present here. Now for getting the skeleton project, first check out the start branch. Now that we have the start branch, you can see we only have some resources. Now before we start coding, let's see what we are getting back in a skeleton project. So first, we have this chat app application that acts as the startup point for our Spring Boot application. Then we have a couple of screenshots that are required for readme.md. Then we have this SQL script that will be running soon in our MySQL database. Then in the templates, we have 3 HTML files. First one, index.html, is the main one, where the main magic happens. So first, I have a couple of styles here. Then there's a header section, the main part, and the footer section. Then the script is the main thing. So first, we have defined a couple of references to specific elements in the HTML document and variables for the currently selected users to chat with and the stomp.js client for WebSocket communication. There's also a username variable that acts as a placeholder for the current user's username provided by Thymeleaf. Then we have an object named notification state to keep track of which users have new messages or notifications. Now coming to the functions, First, we have this connect function that establishes a WebSocket connection using sock.js and stomp.js and calls onConnected once connected. It prevents the default behavior of the form submission. Then we have this function onConnected, which subscribes to personal and public message queues, sends an initial message indicating the user is online, and displays the logged in user's username. It also calls find and display connected users to fetch and show a list of connected users. Then we have this find and display connected users that asynchronously fetches the list of connected users and updates the user list in the UI. Keep in mind that it excludes the current user. Then we have this append user element which creates a list item for each user with a profile image, username, and a notification badge if there are new messages. Clicking a user item triggers a chat with that user. Then we have this function user item click. This function handles the event when a user is selected from the user list. It marks the clicked user as active, shows the message form, clears any notification badge for that user, and loads the chat history with fetch and display user chat. Then we have this method fetch and display user chat, which does what its name suggests. It fetches and displays the chat history between the current user and the selected user. Then we have the function display message, which appends a new message to the chat area, differentiating between sent and received message with appropriate styling. Then we have the function send message, which sends a chat message via WebSockets when the form is submitted. It also appends the message to the chat area. Moving on, then we have created a function on message received, which handles incoming messages. It updates the notification state and displays the message in the chat area if the chat with that sender is currently open. Otherwise, it updates the notification badge for that user. And finally, we have this function logout, which sends a message indicating that the user is offline and reloads the page, effectively logging the user out. Then we have this login.html page, which takes care of logging in a user. And we also have this register.html page for registering or signing up new users. Then in the application.properties, we have defined a couple of properties for connecting to our MySQL database, which consist of username, URL, password, and driver class. Finally, in form.xml, we have defined a couple of dependencies that we'll be using in this project like Spring Web, Spring Security, Thymeleaf, Lombok, and MySQL connector. Now that we understand what we are getting back in our startup project, let's dive straight into coding. Now first, we'll need to create a couple of directories. So we'll go to this chart app directory, click on new, then package, then type in config, controller, model, repository, and finally service. Now first, we'll be creating a couple of model classes. So we'll go here, click on new, Java class, then type in account. Now this class would have four properties or five properties: private long ID, then private string username, then private string password, then private status, And another property, private collection, extends granted authority. Now we'll need to create an enumeration here with name, status, which would have two values, online and offline. Now let's move back to account class. Now this class would also implement the user details. Now we'll add some annotations to these properties. So first, this ID property would have ID annotation, then generated value, identity. Now these properties mark this ID property as a primary key in database and also sets its strategy to generation type dot identity. That is, its value would start increasing like 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then in this class, we would add a couple of annotations at the data, at the rate no args constructor, at the rate all args constructor, and entity. Now at the rate data annotation creates getter and setter for all of these properties that we just defined. So we don't need to explicitly define them. Then no args constructor creates a no argument constructor for this class. All args constructor creates a constructor with all of those properties in it. And then at the rate entity marks this class as an entity so that it gets created in the MySQL database. Then in this property, we'll also add at the rate transient. Now, other than this, we'll also require a constructor here. So if I click on generate, then click on constructor, and I'll need to select everything except for the ID. And it's created. And that's it. We are done with our accounts class. Now moving on, we'll need to create further more classes. The next class would be chat room. Now this class would have the same annotations like count. So I can copy all of them. And one more annotation at the rate builder that helps to build object of chat room by assigning different properties, different values. So we'll see that in action further down the line. Now this class would have properties private long ID, private string ID, chat ID, then private string sender ID, and finally private string receiver ID. Now we'll again add at the rate ID here and at the rate generated value strategy equals to generation type dot identity. Now we'll create another class message, which would again use the same annotations that we used before in account class. Then it would have properties private long id at the rate id at the rate generated value strategy equals to generation type dot identity. Then we'll create private string cat id, sender id, receiver id, content, and private date, timestamp. Now finally, we'll need to create one last model class here, that is notification. Now I can again copy all of those annotations and paste them here. Then type in private long id, private string sender id, receiver id, finally content. That's it. We are done with our model classes now. Now we'll create repository classes or interfaces. So first, we'll be creating the repository interface named account repository. Now this interface would extend JPA repository account, comma, long, and it would have two methods, optional account find by username, string username, then list account find all by status, and we are done with our account repository. Chat room repository, which extends JPA repository, chat room, comma, long, and this would have, oh wait, this would be string in this scenario. Then this would have optional chat room find by sender ID and receiver ID. string sender ID, comma, string receiver ID, and that's it. Then we'll create a final repository, which is message repository, which would extend JPA repository and have message, comma, string list message find by chat ID, string chat ID. And we are done with our repository part as well. Now we are ready to create a service. Let's start by creating account service. Let's mark this as a service by using @service and @required args constructor. And this would also implement user detail service, which we are using for Spring security or logging in purposes. Then we'll write here private final password encoder, password encoder. Now, one thing to notice is that I'm not writing in @autowired before this password encoder dependency. Now, this because when you type in @required args constructor, this dependency injection is taken care by it. So you don't need to add @autowired again and again before every service that you're using. But you have to write it as private final. Then private final account repository, account repository. Now, first method that we'll be creating would be public account find account by username. Which would take in string username as its argument and return account repository dot find by username, and if it doesn't find it, then we throw an exception that says account not found. After this, we'll override a method override public user details load user by username, bring username throws username not found exception, and this would have account equals to find account by username. If account doesn't exist, that is equal to null, then we throw a new username not found exception saying username or password not found. But if does exist, then we return the new account or the existing account back to the user. So account dot get username, comma, account dot get password, comma, authorities. Now we'll define this authorities method, public collection, and this would simply return arrays dot as list new simple granted authority user. Now we are getting back an error here. So let's see this. Cannot resolve constructor. Okay, so from this constructor, we have to remove this status, and then that should work. Yep. Now after this, we'll create public account register account method, which is used for registering accounts. Now first we'll check if the username already exists in the database. So we'll type in account repository dot find by username dot is present username throw new runtime exception username already exists. But if the account already doesn't exist, then we write account equals to new account, and we set the username to username, password, and if you want to encrypt the password, we can write password encoder dot encode. And then finally we return back account repository dot save account. Now after this, we'll create another method public list account get connected users return account repository dot find all by status and status dot online. Fix this. Now after this we'll create a method public void disconnect account user where existing user equals to account repository dot find by username user dot get username dot or else null. If existing user is not equal to null, that is it does exist, so existing user dot get status would be status dot offline on repository dot save existing user. Now as the name suggests, this method would be called when a user disconnects or logs off. So finally we'll write another method public list account find connected user return account repository dot find all by status then status dot online. Now I just noticed something that we don't need this method because we have already get connected users, so we can remove this. That's it. We are done with the account service class. Now we'll be creating another service class, that is chat room service, which would again have two annotations at the rate service and at the rate required args constructor, and this service will use private final chat room repository. Now the first method that this service would have is public optional string get chat room id. This method would take in string sender id, string receiver id, then boolean create room if not exists. Now this method would return chat room repository dot find by sender id and receiver id, and then sender id and receiver id dot map chat room get chat id, which retrieves the chat id, then If the chat ID doesn't exist and create room if not exist is true, then we will be creating a new room. So we'll write where new chat room ID equal to create chat ID, sender ID, comma receiver ID, and return optional dot off new chat room ID. But if we are not creating a new room, then we simply send optional dot empty. Now we'll create another method here, which is a private method, private string create chat ID, which would take in private sender ID, comma string receiver ID. Chat ID would follow the following structure: string dot format percentage s underscore percentage s, that is sender ID underscore receiver ID. After this, we'll write chat room sender receiver chat room dot builder. This is why we added the @builder annotation in chat room dot chat ID dot sender ID dot receiver ID dot build, which builds up an object named sender receiver, which contains the chat ID as chat ID, is sender ID equals to sender ID, and receiver ID equals to receiver ID. Now we'll create another object. We can copy this, paste it here, and this would have the name receiver sender, and the values would be vice versa. We are creating two chat rooms here, one where the sender is the sender and another one where the sender is the receiver, so that we have a two-way communication here. Then chat room repository dot save sender receiver and receiver sender, and finally we return the chat ID. Finally, we'll create one more service here, that is message service. Now again we'll type in @service required args constructor, and in this we'll require private final message repository private final chat room repository or chat room service actually. Now this service class would have the first method as public message save, which would save the message. First, we'll write in private chat ID chat room service dot get chat room ID message dot get sender ID comma message dot get receiver ID comma true. And if it doesn't found any chat room, then it throws a runtime exception saying chat room could not be created or found. Then we set the message dot set chat ID equals to chat ID and save that message. Finally, we return that message and we are done with this method. Now we'll require one more method in this class, that is public list message get chat message retrieve older messages bring sender ID bring receiver ID where chat ID equals to chat room service dot get chat room ID sender ID receiver ID and false because we don't want to create a new chat room. Return chat ID dot map message repository find by chat ID or else we return back a new array list. And that's it. We are finally done with all of our service classes. Now after this, we'll create a couple of config classes. So the first config class that we'll create is security config for logging in and registering purposes. Now this class would have two annotations at the rate configuration and at the rate enable web security. Now first we'll type in at the rate autowired account service, then at the rate bean public static password encoder which would return back new bcrypt password encoder, then at the rate bean public purity filter chain which would take in http security as an argument, throws exception http dot tsrf dot disable authorize HTTP request auths dot request matcher slash css slash asterisk asterisk comma slash images slash asterisk asterisk js slash and slash web jars slash asterisk asterisk dot permit all request matcher slash register dot permit all dot any request dot authenticated. Now for these following URLs or patterns, we don't want any authorization, so they should be openly accessible. Then we'll type in form login, form dot login page dot login processing URL dot default success URL. So this is the page that the user would be routed to once he has successfully logged in dot permit all. Then we'll type in logout logout dot invalid HTTP session true dot clear authentication true dot logout request matcher new and path request matcher dot logout success URL login logout dot permit all. Finally, we'll write in headers frame option frame options dot same origin. And finally, we'll return http dot build. Now we'll require one more method in this auto void public void configure global authentication manager builder, auth throws exception, and we'll write auth dot user detail service account service dot password encoder, and we are done with our security config file. Other than this, we'll also need to create a WebSocket config file. Now in this class, we'll first add in @configuration @enable WebSocket message broker, and this class would implement WebSocket message broker configurer @override public void configure message broker. Message broker registry dot enable simple broker /user registry dot set application destination prefix /app, and registry dot set user destination prefix /user. After this, we'll again override another method, public void register storm endpoint, storm endpoint registry dot add endpoint /ws dot with sockjs. And finally, we'll write one last method, public boolean configure message converter, list message converter message converters. Now after this, we'll write in default content type resolver equals to new default content type resolver dot set default mime type utils dot application json, then mapping jackson to message converter, equal to new Then converter dot set object mapper, new object mapper, converter dot set content resolver, and message converter dot add converter. Finally, will return false. And we're getting back an error. So let's see what we have done wrong. Okay, so we imported this message converter from a wrong library. So we imported it from ch.qs logback classic pattern. If I remove this and then import it again, this time we'll be importing it from Spring Boot framework, and it works fine now. And that's it. We are done with our WebSocket config. And now let's work on our controller classes. So the first class that we'll be creating would be account controller, and we'll use two annotations here, at the rate controller and at the rate required args constructor. Then we'll inject private final account service, and first endpoint that we'll be creating would be a get mapping for register page, public string show registration form, return register. Then we'll expose a post endpoint that would be executed once a user registers, public string register account at the rate request param string username comma at the rate request param string password, then model. In this, we'll write a try catch block, count service dot register account username comma password, return a redirect to login page. And in case if there is an exception, we add that in the model with the error e dot get message, return register. Now after this, we'll again create a get endpoint, public string login, return login at the get mapping slash index public string index model string username equals to security context holder dot get context dot get authentication dot get name model dot add attribute username comma username return index. Now after this we'll create another method public count add user at the rate payload account user, and we'll add annotations here at the message mapping forward slash user dot add user at the rate send to forward slash user slash public, and in this we'll write account service dot save user. I think we missed creating this method save user. We'll go to account service and then just copy this method, name it as save user, and type in online. And now we can move back to our account controller class and finally return user. After this, we'll create another method, but we'll change this endpoint to disconnect user. Change this method name to disconnect user. And instead of saving user, we'll use disconnect. Finally, we'll write at the get mapping slash users public response entity list of accounts, then find connected user and return response entity dot OK account service dot get connected users. Now this endpoint would return back the connected users or users that are online. And that's it. We are done with our account controller class now. Finally, we'll create one last class with the name chat controller. Now again, we'll add annotations here. At the rate controller, at the rate required args constructor, then private final simp messaging template, private final message service at the rate message mapping slash chat public void process at the rate payload message. Now in this method, we'll type in message, saved message equal to message service dot save messaging template dot convert and send to user message dot get receiver ID comma slash q slash messages comma new notification saved message dot get ID saved message dot get sender ID saved message dot get receiver ID and saved message dot content. And finally, we'll create one method get mapping slash messages slash sender ID receiver ID public response entity list of messages get chat message. At the path variable string sender ID receiver ID where chat message equals to message service dot get chat message sender ID receiver ID return response entity dot OK chat messages. And that's it. We are done with our whole code now. Now, before we start this application, we first have to set up the database as well. So we'll go to MySQL database, open it, and then run the query that is present in this SQL script, that is create database chat app. This would create a chat app database here. Right now it doesn't have any tables and you don't need to manually create them. That would be created by a Spring Boot application once you start it. So let's start it up. Now we are getting back some errors here, which says set username does not exist as set password cannot find symbol method. So to resolve these errors, you simply have to go to files, then settings, then inside this open build execution and deployment, then compiler, and then annotation processing. Then inside this, go to your chat app and instead of processor path, select obtain processor from class path. And now if you run it again, we are getting back another error here that says public key retrieval is not allowed. So you simply have to go to application.properties and then set your password here. For me, it's test at that 123. Click on save. Now run it again. Using localhost 8080. We are greeted with a login page. If I go to my register here page and register a user named Goldencat 1234 as password, and then see this table account, you can see that we have just registered our first user. Now we can register another user here, a Mr. Dog, same password, and run this again. Now we have two accounts here. Now if I open one of the account here, say Goldencat 1234, takes us to the index.html page. Right now there are no online users. So if I open another instance of it in another window, say Explorer, localhost 8080, and then type in Mr. Dog 1234, you can see the online users is showing Goldencat. If I send him a message, and then open it here, I get a notification that says new. If I open it, I get the message hello. And if I send out another message here, so to make it more visible, it sends out the message in real time as we intended. And we can also log out from here. So if I log off, it stops showing the online users in the backend. So that's it. That's how you create a one-to-one chat application using Spring Boot, Spring Security, WebSockets, and Thymeleaf using MySQL database. Now this is a 3-tier web application that we have just created, and you can further expand this for your personal project. As always, we'll end this video with a quote that says, "Success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in and day out." Thank you for watching and have a great day.